Okay, let's unpack this. We've been given quite a stack of sources, articles, blog posts, even some, online discussions, and they're all kind of circling around one pretty fascinating idea that maybe, just maybe, your best European trip in 2025 involves skipping the usual suspects. We're
Mhm.
talking about looking beyond places like, well, Paris, Rome, Barcelona,
Right.
the big ones.
Exactly. These sources, they collectively suggest focusing on what they're calling underrated European cities. They're painting this picture of places brimming with charm, history, unique character, and crucially promising fewer crowds than the perennial favorites.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive, then, is to take these varied recommendations, sort of sift through the details, and really get a sense of what these places actually offer. Why are they considered underrated? And, importantly, could one of them be the perfect fit for your next great European adventure? We'll explore everything from cities known for spas or like cutting-edge design to spots celebrated for wine, deep history, or stunning natural beauty, all pulled straight from these sources.
And we're not just, listing them. We're going to really dig into what makes them distinct from the crowded big names. We'll pull out specific examples, local flavors, the unique atmosphere each city presents, according to these sources. We'll also touch on practicalities, like, how easy they are to get to, and even look at what others who visited think. Because as these sources show, the whole idea of underrated can be pretty subjective, actually.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's start there. Why are so many travelers and sources pointing away from the most famous spots right now? What's the core appeal of this whole underrated idea based on the material we looked at?
Well, it seems to boil down to a few key desires the sources repeatedly highlight. The primary one is, simply put, avoiding those overwhelming crowds. We've all been there, right? Peak season in a major capital. So by going elsewhere, you're looking for more authenticity, maybe a chance to connect with local life away from the main tourist crush.
Right, finding those places far from the crowds and off the beaten path, as one source put it. Less about, like, battling for a view, more about just being there.
Precisely. Sources talk about discovering quieter, quirkier corners, places described as hidden stars.
Hmm.
One article put it beautifully, saying it's about experiencing beauty and charm without having to use your elbows. And it's often linked to better value to things like finding more affordable coffee or meals, maybe even getting more smiles from waiters because the local scene isn't stretched to its absolute limit.
That makes sense. It's about finding places that haven't been hashtagged to death, at least not yet, as one source
Yeah,
said.
exactly. That feeling of discovery, of uncovering what feel like Europe's best kept secrets.
Okay, let's start bringing this to life with some specific examples. We definitely saw a few cities pop up across multiple sources, which suggests they're really getting traction among people looking for these kinds of experiences. First up, Ljubljana, Slovenia. This one seems like a real contender in that underrated but amazing category.
Yes, definitely. It's specifically called out as an underrated city, and one source was just, well, gushing about it, basically saying, Slovenia has been hiding from us.
Huh? Hidden no longer, it seems. So, based on the sources, what is it about Ljubljana that makes people fall for it?
Well, the sources describe it as one of Europe's smallest capital cities, but apparently it's packed with charm. The old town sounds straight out of a fairy tale, cobblestone streets, colorful buildings, and that iconic dragon bridge.
Hmm?
It's also consistently described as incredibly green and laid back, almost soulful was a word used.
I love that, green and
Right.
soulful. What are some of those unique, slightly quirky details the sources mention that give it that specific character?
Oh, there are plenty. The dragon, for instance, is everywhere. It's the city's symbol. You see them on the bridge in statues. Then there's the triple bridge, which is literally three bridges side by side, designed by this famous local architect, Josh Pochanek, whose work is apparently all over the city. The sources also really highlight how green it is. It was Europe's green capital in 2016.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so car-free center, loads of parks, easy access to nature right nearby. You can even kayak right through the city center on the river.
Kayak through the city. That's definitely unique.
Right, it adds to that laid-back vibe. Plus, you have details like drinkable public fountains scattered around, urban beekeeping initiatives, even a retro tram cafe where you can grab a coffee while touring. And of course, the local food mentions things like potica, which is a kind of cake, or krunchka klobasa sausage. It sounds like a city that's just very comfortable in its own skin, blending history with a really modern green outlook.
Okay, sounds pretty enchanting.
Yeah.
Now, moving west a bit, we have Seville
Yeah.
in Spain. This one's interesting because, like you said about subjectivity, one source calls it underrated, but another describes it as A firm favorite and one of my favorite cities.
Exactly. That perfectly illustrates the point. The sources definitely agree it's a stunning, vibrant city in Andalusia, known for its beautiful architecture, being the absolute heart of flamenco, and having an incredible tapas culture. It's apparently very walkable, really lively, and offers fantastic nightlife, too.
Hmm. What's the key thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about Seville based on these sources?
The heat. Multiple sources strongly emphasize this. It gets very hot, or even extremely hot during the summer months, roughly May to October, so timing your visit seems pretty critical.
Right.
Also, one source noted that some travelers feel the food scene, while good, might be a bit overrated compared to other Spanish cities like maybe those in the Basque Country. So it seems it's loved for its energy and culture, but maybe not universally praised just for the food, you know?
Good to know. So heat-tolerant travelers or definitely shoulder season visitors, take note.
Next up, heading over to Portugal, Évora also appeared in a couple of our sources.
Okay, Évora. What's the vibe there, according to the descriptions?
It's described as a sun-drenched pocket of peace in the Alentejo region. It's got UNESCO World Heritage status, ancient Roman ruins, like a really well-preserved temple, and this lovely, quiet, almost sleepy charm. The sources also couldn't say enough good things about the food, calling it ridiculously good. They highlighted local dishes like porco preto, that's a specific type of black pork, or a sorda, which is a bread soup. The Cartixa winery nearby also gets a specific shout-out for tastings.
And I understand it's quite easy to get to.
Yes, that's a big plus mentioned by the sources. It's only about 1.5 hours from Lisbon by car or train. Makes it an easy addition to a Portugal trip, or maybe a relaxed base to explore the wider Alentejo region with all its hilltop villages and castles.
Okay. And finally, among the cities that popped up in multiple sources, we have Tirana, Albania. This sounds like one that genuinely surprised some travelers.
It really does. Sources describe it as often overlooked but truly exceeding expectations. A delightful surprise was the phrase used.
What surprised people about it then?
The energy, it seems. It's called hip and lively, with trendy cafes, bars, a definite buzz about it. But it's also deeply layered with history. Sources mention fascinating attractions like the Bunk Art 2 Museum, which is housed in an actual former bunker and delves into Albania's communist past. Very interesting. And the Tirana Castle area, now known as Murat Toptani Street, is apparently a really charming spot with shops and cafes.
And the cost. I think I saw that mentioned as a major point.
Oh, absolutely. One source boldly calls it possibly Europe's best value destination.
Huh.
We're talking hearty meals for like 5 to 8 and beers under 1.50 A. That kind of affordability obviously makes it very attractive for budget-conscious travelers.
Wow, it's incredible value. Any specific notes for travelers heading there?
Just one point from a source mentions that Albania is generally quite conservative. It advises that LGBTQ plus travelers should probably be mindful of local customs, specifically suggesting avoiding public displays of affection.
Okay, good to be aware of. So those are the cities that consistently appeared across our source material. But honestly, the sources offered so many more possibilities, each with its own unique hook or appeal. Let's dive into a few more that really stood out for their specific angle, just to paint a broader picture of what's out there.
Absolutely. For instance, if relaxation and maybe a touch of luxury are your focus, sources highlight Baden-Baden, Germany. It's presented as this classic spa town right on the edge of the Black Forest, famous since Roman times for its thermal baths. You've got manicured parks, an incredibly ornate casino, apparently it even inspired Dostoevsky, and the Museum Frieder Bruder for art lovers. Plus, hiking trails basically right outside the door in the Schwarzwald.
Sounds incredibly elegant, very refined. Now, for something equally beautiful but with a totally different vibe, sources point to Lecce, Italy, nicknamed the Florence of the South.
And yeah, apparently for good reason. Sources describe it as just an overload of stunning Baroque architecture, all glowing in that southern Italian sunshine. But it's not just history. Sources also mention finding modern, cool boutiques and galleries there, alongside enjoying local treats like orecchiette pasta.
Okay, from Italian Baroque to Spanish wine, Haro, Spain, is highlighted. The capital of the famous Rioja wine region, right?
Yes, exactly. Known for its winding alleys, a museum, and famously a wine battle festival, which sounds intense. Sources describe a wonderfully slow pace of life there, centered around, well, unsurprisingly, excellent wine.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears completely, sources suggest keeping an eye on Leipzig, Germany. It's getting some buzz as the new Berlin.
Yeah, it's presented as a city that kind of remixes its history with a very contemporary feel. Sources note its mix of Baroque architecture and vibrant street art. There's this former factory complex, the Bombel Spinneray, now full of galleries and apparently lots of green spaces and lakes nearby, too. It sounds like a place with a buzzing cafe culture and a strong startup spirit.
That's a cool blend. And over in the Netherlands, Eindhoven is singled out.
Yeah, this city is highlighted specifically as a design capital with a definite industrial edge to it. Sources mention its futuristic architecture, like a building called the Blob,
A blog, okay.
and areas like Stry PS, which was a former Philips factory site, now repurposed into galleries, cafes, creative spaces. It sounds like it's all about bold ideas there.
So I've got spa towns, design hubs, wine country. What about somewhere with a really strong, maybe local identity?
Münster, Germany is called the cycling capital of Germany in one source. They describe it as having medieval beauty, but also a lively student population, leafy parks, and a lovely lake, the AC. Trying local dishes like Münsterländer Tüchchen is recommended there.
And perhaps somewhere with more of an alpine charm.
Klagenfurt, Austria seems to fit that perfectly. Sources describe lakeside charm blended with alpine cool. A place with a literary soul, apparently. A beautiful old town influenced by Italian architecture. And the stunning turquoise Lake Wörthersee right nearby. You might want to try Kartner Kostnudeln, a type of filled pasta there.
Wow, okay. We could seriously go on just listing amazing-sounding cities from these sources, but you really get the idea there's incredible variety beyond the obvious headliners. I mean, from the Baltic gem of Riga, Latvia, noted as being affordable, and the least crowded capital with amazing Art Nouveau architecture.
Yeah, or Thessaloniki, Greece, with its rich history as a real crossroads, vibrant energy, ancient ruins meeting hip nightlife, and easy access to the sea.
And the surprising blend of history and modernity in Warsaw, Poland, with its beautifully restored old town right next to a thriving modern business district and arts scene.
Or the incredibly picturesque archipelago city of Stockholm, Sweden, famous for its waterways, green spaces, historical landmarks, and of course the Swedish concept of fika, coffee and cake time.
Can't argue with fika.
Definitely not. Or even Graz, Austria, which was described by one source as their personal favorite city, offering the charm of a larger town but with a more laid-back vibe, mixing historic UNESCO sites with really striking modern architecture.
And Bratislava, Slovakia, often seen just as a stopover from nearby Vienna, but the sources really suggest it offers much more. Rich history on the Danube, affordability, and a vibrant, walkable old town with quirky statues and hidden bars, apparently.
And bringing it back to the UK, Brighton and Hove, England, which blends that traditional seaside charm with a very modern, artsy feel. Known for its colorful beach huts down in Hove, the Palace Pier, and loads of street art.
And then delving deeper into countries we've already touched on. Maribor, Slovenia, which is apparently home to the world's oldest grapevine, over 400 years old. Plus a fairy tale old town, and it's surrounded by mountains for hiking.
Or Braga, Portugal, often called the Rome of Portugal because of its deep religious history and Baroque churches, but it also has this lively university energy.
Or the architecturally fascinating Hradec Králové in the Czech Republic, known as the Salon of the Republic, for its stunning mix of styles and apparently a strong local feel, especially during summer festivals.
And the UNESCO gem of Berat, Albania, the city of 1,000 windows, with its unique cascading houses. Apparently, the castle has a whole neighborhood inside its walls you can explore.
Wow.
Or Klaipėda, Lithuania, a port city described as this interesting blend of German precision, Scandinavian aesthetics, and Lithuanian soul. Plus, it's the gateway to the incredible sand dunes of the Curonian Spit.
Or, for those who love Italian charm, but maybe not the Venice crowds, Treviso, Italy. It's just 30 minutes away, offers canals, medieval walls, arcaded streets, but with a decidedly local feel. And it's right in Prosecco country.
Always a bonus. And then down to the Balkans, Kotor, Montenegro. Sources describe these dramatic fjords meeting medieval magic in the bay, an old town nestled within walls that literally climb the mountain. Although, and this is an important point from one source, especially that Reddit discussion, users noted Kotor was very crowded in 2024, getting similar to Dubrovnik. So visiting off-season there is really becoming a must, it seems.
That's a really key piece of feedback right there. It illustrates how quickly places can gain popularity and, well, potentially lose some of that underrated charm.
It really does. And then there are places highlighted that sound almost too unique to be real. Like Görlitz, Germany, which has apparently been used as a Hollywood set for the Grand Budapest Hotel, among others, because it has this incredible variety of historical buildings all in one place.
Wow.
Or Eger, Hungary, famous for its thermal baths, its bull's blood wine, a historic castle, and even a valley lined with wine cellars where you can catch folk dancing. And finally, Ohrid, North Macedonia, set on Lake Ohrid, one of Europe's oldest and deepest lakes. It's a UNESCO site with over 365 churches, crystal clear waters, ancient ruins. And it was described as offering possibly some of the best travel value in Europe for things like food and beer.
Incredible. And just to quickly mention, one source highlighted some places that sound like truly hidden gems, really off the main tourist radar. Places like Bosa, Italy, known for colorful houses, a spot on Lake Como called Nesso with a gorge and waterfall, tiny Corvo Island in the Azores, the beautiful pink village of Albarracin in Spain, a stunning dervish monastery in Blagaj, Bosnia-Herzegovina, a medieval village in Spain called Rupert with a hanging bridge, the quiet Greek island of Halki, the picturesque seaside town of Tenby in Wales, and Italy's natural hot springs at Saturnia. These sound like places for a whole different kind of deep dive entirely.
They certainly do. And, bringing up coders crowding brings us back to that really important point raised across these sources, particularly in those Reddit discussions we looked at. Are all the cities on these so-called underrated lists truly underrated anymore? Or are some just, popular cities that get mixed reviews or are facing recent crowd issues?
Right, that Reddit thread specifically debated a different top 10 list for 2025 that included places like Madrid, Istanbul, Dubrovnik, Lisbon, Vienna, Copenhagen. Pretty major destinations.
Exactly. And the community discussion there really highlighted how subjective that term underrated is. People were asking, are these genuine hidden gems or just well-known places that some people absolutely love and others maybe don't? Perhaps precisely because they're now too popular or expensive.
So what were some of the strong feelings in that debate? Where did the disagreements lie?
Well, Dubrovnik was a major one. While everyone acknowledges its beauty, yeah, many users described it pretty harshly terrible, overhyped, overpriced. They felt it was completely over-touristed, describing it almost like a theme park because of the sheer volume of crowds and cruise ships. The strong consensus seemed to be stunning, yes, but only visit in the absolute off-season, or maybe consider nearby islands as an alternative.
Which is interesting because, as we just noted, even places once considered alternatives like Kotor are starting to see similar crowd issues reported.
It just shows how dynamic the whole travel landscape is right now. Vienna and Copenhagen also sparked really conflicting opinions. Some users found them, frankly, boring, not super exciting or very expensive. One even described Vienna as beige and inert. Ouch.
Wow, beige.
Yeah. But then others immediately jumped in to praise them, highlighting Vienna's cozy feel and deep history, or Copenhagen's cool vibe, beauty, and walkability.
So your experience of a city, even a very popular one, really depends heavily on your personal priorities and expectations, doesn't it?
Precisely. Istanbul was another fascinating case study in that thread. Some users called it fantastic, very special, among their absolute favorites, while others had strongly negative experiences, finding it massively overcrowded, oppressive, reporting being constantly harassed, and noting absurd prices now. It really seems to be one of those places people either love or hate, depending on the traveler and perhaps the timing of their visit.
And Lisbon. That seems to be on everyone's list lately, from the most popular recommendations to some of these underrated ones. How did it fare in that discussion?
In that particular Reddit thread, Lisbon was generally very well liked, actually. Users called it a firm favorite, really enjoyable, a great city. They praised its weather, the food scene generally, ease of day trips like to Sintra, and the overall vibe. They did note, however, that it's very hilly prepare for walking uphill. And, like many popular places, it is becoming increasingly over-touristed and more expensive.
Okay. And what about some of the others on that debated list, like Bordeaux or Tallinn?
The feedback there was a bit more mixed. Some found them nice, but nothing special, suggesting maybe they're only worth a couple of days. For Bordeaux specifically, some felt other French cities like Lyon or Strasbourg offered more interest. But then again, others really loved Tallinn, calling it one of their favorite cities.
This whole debate really underscores that underrated isn't some fixed status, is it? It's often a moving target, heavily influenced by personal taste, expectations, and the current reality of crowds and prices in any given destination. It seems like it's much more about finding the right fit for you based on the best information you can gather.
Absolutely. And speaking of finding the right fit, the sources offer some really practical tips if you are planning to explore some of these less trodden paths in Europe.
Timing seems like a consistent piece of advice that came up again and again.
Oh, absolutely critical. The consensus is overwhelmingly in favor of the shoulder season, so April, May, and September, October. Sources say you generally get perfect weather then, and even fewer tourists than in the peak summer months. They strongly advise avoiding August in most Mediterranean areas if you can. However, they also mention that some places, like Ljubljana, can be a real fairy tale postcard in the winter snow. And cities like Seville, Madrid, or Vienna might offer a cozier feel or just fewer crowds in the colder months too, so winter isn't always out.
Okay. What about getting to these places and navigating once you're actually there?
Right. For travel between cities, sources generally recommend trains or buses like Flixbus or regional options for affordability, especially when going between the more well-connected hubs. Renting a car is suggested if you really want to explore a specific region more deeply, like the Alentejo around Évora, the Rioja wine country, or the landscapes of Albania and Montenegro. Within the cities themselves, though, so many on these lists are highlighted as being incredibly walkable. Places like Évora, Lecce, Haro, Minster, Tirana, Thessaloniki, Ljubljana, Bratislava, Seville, Braga, Berat, Treviso, Kotor, Görlitz, Eger, Ohrid, and pretty much all those tiny hidden gems we mentioned. Some, like Münster and Ljubljana, are specifically called out as being very bike-friendly, too. It's definitely worth checking if a city has its own local airport or good train connections as part of your planning process.
Any tips from the sources for truly experiencing the local culture for blending in a bit more?
Yeah, the usual advice, but always good. Learning a few basic greetings is always recommended. Shows respect. Sources also suggest trying to eat where the locals eat, maybe being a little wary of restaurants with huge multilingual menus plastered outside, as they might cater more specifically to tourists. Visiting local markets is highlighted as a great way to find authentic food and just soak up the atmosphere. They specifically mention markets in places like Ljubljana, Münster, and Treviso as good examples. And, look for those specific local experiences the sources mention, like kayaking the river in Ljubljana, exploring the wine cellars in Eger, or visiting the ethnographic museum in Berat. Those unique local things.
And the cost factor. How significant is that, really, for these kinds of cities?
It's often a major draw, according to the sources. They repeatedly highlight that many of these underrated destinations can mean significantly more budget-friendly prices for things like food, drink, and accommodation compared to the major Western European capitals. Riga, Tirana, Berat, Klaipėda, Treviso, Kotor, Görlitz, Eger, and Ohrid are particularly noted for offering good value, with Albania and North Macedonia really called out for being exceptionally affordable. And simple things can help too, like drinking tap water where it's safe, which is most places on these lists, maybe with a question mark over parts of Albania, and buying picnic supplies at local markets. Easy ways to save.
And I remember there were also some specific notes for different types of travelers in one of the sources, right?
Yes, that's right. For solo female travelers, one source recommended places like Braga, Ohrid, Treviso, and Maribor as likely being particularly safe and comfortable. It also noted that in some smaller towns, like Berat or Eger, locals might show some curiosity towards a solo traveler, but it's generally described as being welcoming and friendly curiosity, not hostile. And for LGBTQ plus travelers, places like Braga, Maribor, Hradec Králové, and Görlitz were highlighted as likely more accepting. This reflects the generally progressive attitudes in Portugal, Slovenia, and Czechia, and Germany's overall friendliness. Conversely, though, sources specifically advised avoiding public displays of affection in more socially conservative places like Montenegro, specifically mentioning Kotor, and Albania, mentioning Berat.
Wow. Okay, that has been quite a journey, exploring so many really intriguing places that might not have been on your radar, or maybe our radar, for 2025.
Indeed. I mean, from the ancient thermal baths of Baden-Baden to the really unique modern architecture you might find in Hradec Králové or Eindhoven, or the wine cellars of Eger, the seaside charm of Brighton, or that truly off-the-beaten-path feel of a place like Corvo Island or Blagaj. The sheer variety out there is just astounding when you look beyond the top 5 or 10 most famous names.
And it feels clearer than ever that underrated is a really personal, subjective concept. A city that one person finds maybe boring, another might find charmingly laid back and exactly what they're looking for. A destination some now see as an over-touristed theme park, others might still find perfectly authentic and wonderful if they visit during the right season or explore specific neighborhoods away from the main drags.
Yeah, what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how much character, history, and rich experience exists just slightly away from that main spotlight. The sources really highlight this persistent desire among travelers, maybe even a growing desire, to seek out those unique moments, those genuine local connections that just get harder and harder to find in the most incredibly crowded, popular spots.
So what does this all mean for you as you think about your own travel plans? Maybe it's about picking a city based on a specific detail that really sparked your imagination, like Ljubljana's dragons, or Maribor's ancient vine, or the idea of kayaking through a capital city. Or perhaps it's looking at the practicalities, finding somewhere that offers exceptional value for money, or is particularly welcoming for solo travelers, or just really easy to reach by train for a shorter break.
It definitely raises an important question, I think, that kind of sits at the heart of this whole deep dive. In a world where travel information travels instantly and popularity can explode almost overnight, can any true hidden gems actually stay secret for long? Or are they simply out there waiting for the right traveler, perhaps you, to discover their unique charm before everyone else catches on? Something to ponder, maybe, as you plan your next adventure.